The knock on my door wasn't loud. It was deliberate. 3 slow raps, evenly spaced, the kind that say we know you're home, and we're not leaving until you answer. I had just returned from a 12-hour shift at the precinct. My badge sat on the kitchen counter, my service weapon locked in the safe by the stays. I was still in my undershirt, halfway through reheating leftover lasagna when I heard it. That knock. When I opened the door, I found 2 men in dark uniforms standing on my porch. Their badges gleamed under the porch light. Both wore stern expressions, one resting a hand on his holster like he'd been trained to intimidate. "Mr. Carter," the taller one asked. "Chief Carter," I corrected automatically. It wasn't ego, it was habit. He blinked. "Sir, we have a warrant for your arrest." I laughed before I could stop myself. "You have what?" The shorter man, with a buzz cut and a clipboard, stepped forward. Failure to comply with HOA regulations, Section 14C, concerning an authorized fencing and disturbance of common property. For a second, I thought it was a prank. My homeowner association had been giving me hell for a month about a simple wooden fence I built to keep stray dog from tearing through my yard. The president of the HOA, a smug man named Gregory Holt, had sent me 3 warning letters, each more threatening than the last. But an arrest? For a fence? Then I looked close at the officers. Their badges didn't look right, shiny, but too polished. The stitching on their uniforms was uneven, like something you'd order from a cheap costume catalog. And that's when I noticed the patches. Metro Enforcement Division, not a real department anywhere in the state. My mind shifted gears. I had spent 15 years in law enforcement, 12 of those as a detective before I was appointed chief. I'd seen every kind of scam, every kind of fake authority play. But this was a first. "Why don't you gentlemen step inside?" I said evenly. "We can clear this up." The tall one hesitated but nodded. The moment they crossed my threshold, I closed the door and flipped the deadbolt. My kitchen felt suddenly too small, too quiet. "Before we continue," I said, "I just need to know what precinct you're with again." "Metro Enforcement Division," the tall one repeated, jaw tight. "Never heard of it," I said, opening the drawer beside me. My hand found my badge, still warm from my pocket earlier that day. I held it up. "Because I'm Chief Daniel Carter of the Brookhaven Police Department. So, you want to explain why 2 impersonators are standing in my kitchen waving fake warrants." For a moment, they froze. Then, like cornered rats, they looked at each other and bolted. The shorter one shoved me with surprising force, knocking the badge from my hand. By the time I regained my footing, both men were halfway to their van. It was dark gray, unmarked, with a magnetic decal that read Metro Enforcement Division. I sprinted after them, adrenaline surging through my veins. "Stop! Police!" They peeled out of my driveway, tires squealing, taillights vanishing into the night. I stood there, chest heaving, my porch light flickering behind me. My neighbors peeked through their curtains, faces pale in the dim glow. Someone whispered, "Did they just try to arrest a chief?" I could only shake my head. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, reviewing the HOA complaint emails on my laptop, cross-referencing every name, every signature. I pulled up Holt's contact information and stared at his smug headshot from the HOA directory, a man in his mid-50s, silver hair slicked back, wearing an expensive suit he didn't earn. What was his endgame? Did he think sending fake cops would scare me into tearing down the fence? By 3 a.m., I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. The next morning, I called in 2 of my most trusted detectives, Rodriguez and Patel. We'd worked homicide together before I made chief, and I trusted them more than anyone. When I told them what had happened, they both stared at me like I had just recited a bad joke. "You're saying 2 guys dressed as cops showed up at your door with a fake warrant?" Rodriguez said, "Exactly." "And they said they were from the Metro Enforcement Division." "Yeah." Rodriguez frowned. "That's not even a real department." "Exactly my point." Patel leaned back in his chair. "You think the HOA's behind this?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." He whistled softly. "That's bold, even for Holt." "Bold or stupid," I muttered. "We're going to find out which." We ran the van's description through traffic cameras, but it had no plates, just a dealer tag. No luck. The uniforms, the badges, even the warrant, all custom-made, all fake. But there was one lead. The name at the bottom of the warrant read Officer W. Dempsey. That name didn't appear in any official database, but it did appear in the HOA member directory. William Dempsey, treasurer. Now it was personal. That evening, I decided to pay a visit to the next HOA meeting. The moment I walked into the community clubhouse, the room went silent. A dozen homeowners sat in plastic chairs, whispering nervously. Holt was at the head of the table, his smirk faltering when he saw me. "Chief Carter," he said, his tone overly polite. "To what do we owe the honor?" "Just thought I'd drop by," I said. "Seems like we've got some enforcement issues to discuss." A bead of sweat formed at his temple. "If this is about the fence, we've already—" "Oh, it's about more than the fence," I interrupted, stepping closer. "It's about your little Metro Enforcement Division." Gasps rippled through the room. Holt's chair creaked as he leaned back. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." I reached into my jacket pocket and dropped a printed photo onto the table, a still frame from my doorbell camera. It showed the two fake officers, faces clear, badges glinting. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Those men tried to arrest me last night," I said, my voice low. "Impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime, Greg, and if you think you can intimidate me with cheap theatrics, you picked the wrong man." The room fell dead silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. Finally, Holt forced a laugh. "Chief, you must be mistaken. Our HOA never authorized anything like that. Perhaps a misunderstanding." I leaned closer until he could see the anger burning behind my eyes. "No misunderstanding, Greg. This is war." After that night, strange things started happening. My mailbox was smashed twice. My car tires were slashed. A citation appeared taped to my front door claiming I owed the HOA $5,000 in enforcement penalties. It was a campaign of harassment, petty, underhanded, but clearly coordinated. Every cop in my department told me to let it go, that pressing charges would look personal, unprofessional. But this wasn't about pride anymore. It was about justice. I spent the next week quietly digging. Using my connections at City Hall, I discovered the HOA had recently applied for a private security license under the name Metro Enforcement Division, LLC. It had been approved 2 weeks earlier, thanks to forged documents and fake signatures. And at the top of the filing, Gregory Holt and William Dempsey. They created a fake police outfit, not just to intimidate homeowners, but to control them. Power, fear, fines, all under the guise of authority. But what they didn't realize was that they tried their little stunt on the one man who could destroy them from the inside out. I sat back in my office, staring at the evidence laid out before me, photos, printouts, signed affidavits. The faint hum of the city outside my window was almost comforting, and I smiled for the first time in days. They thought they could scare me. They thought they could humiliate me. They forgot who I am. I'm the chief of police. And now, it's my turn to knock. But how far would I go to make them pay? They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagreed. Cold would let them regroup, plan, weasel. No, revenge, I decided, to be precise, surgical, and public enough to make cowardice contagious. The first move was obvious. I couldn't act officially without blowing my own cover and inviting accusations of misuse of power. The citizens who'd sat across from me at HOA meetings weren't stupid. They'd sniff any hint of favoritism and use it to paint me into a corner. So I planned 2 tracks, one above board and legal, the other underneath it, where the real work would get done. Above board, I filed complaints with the state attorney's office and with the Department of Consumer Protection. I handed over my doorbell footage, the fake warrant, the LLC paperwork, and the traffic camera stills that showed an unregistered van with a dealer plate. Those papers got me a sympathetic investigator in the AG's office, someone who understood how HOA corruption metastasized into organized schemes when left unchecked. That investigator became my quiet ally. Underneath, I turned to Rodriguez and Patel. "We make this small," I told them in the briefing room, palms flat on the table. "We make it personal enough to hurt them where they live, their credibility, their their pockets, their pride. And we do it in public. Rodriguez cracked his knuckles. You want a sting? No, I corrected. A spectacle. The spectacle started with a series of small, deliberate leaks. I had the investigator in the AG's office release redacted summaries of pending inquiries to a local reporter I trusted. The headlines were measured. HOA under investigation for fraudulent security operations. It wasn't libel because it was factual in source, but it got Holt twitching. He responded exactly how I wanted, by escalating. Holt began posting threatening notices, hiring a private attorney, and sending intimidating letters around the neighborhood claiming the police were conspiring with me. That helped me in two ways. It made the HOA look defensive and it pushed Dempsey into a corner. Men like Dempsey don't hide well when the lights shine on them. They flail. Next, we baited the trap. Patel posed as a nervous new homeowner who had just moved in and was terrified of Metro enforcement patrols. He called the HOA office, leaving messages that painted a picture of a widow with a nervous family and small children. Holt bid immediately, suggesting private patrols and steep compliance fees to protect the family. Dempsey volunteered to come meet in person. We set the meeting at a cafe 2 blocks from the clubhouse. I sat in the car with a lapel MIC and a camera mounted on the dash. Rodriguez and 2 uniformed officers, off duty but in plain clothes to cover, positioned themselves at exits. We had one goal: get Dempsey to talk. He arrived with his usual nervous smile and a folder under his arm. He was careful at first, only small talk, then grew reckless as Patel spun a tale about the widow's fears and the fees spiraling into court notices. Dempsey's mouth loosened. Greed does that. He described how they'd set up Metro Enforcement's LLC to offer services and how Holt had signed off on the vendor contract that authorized the group to issue fines and enforce community standards. He admitted, in a casual, conversational tone, to forging signatures to get the security license through. He described how they'd purchased uniforms and badges, how the van rotation was outsourced to a temp agency that didn't check credentials. He even laughed about delivering a fake warrant to sort out a stubborn chief. Everything Dempsey said was recorded, and when he left the cafe, thinking he'd landed a new client, Rodriguez tapped the horn. Dempsey froze and turned. 2 officers approached gently and asked if he'd mind coming downtown to answer a few questions. He didn't resist. Men who impersonate officers are more terrifying when they are the ones being handcuffed. The arrest was clean. We booked him on charges of impersonating an officer, fraud, and forgery. The media caught wind and arrived outside the station like vultures. Holt tried to spin it as a personal vendetta, but the recorded conversation quickly undercut him. News stations played Dempsey's voice, clear, greedy, incriminating. The public spectacle we'd planned was in motion. Holt's response was to double down, predictable and fatal. He scheduled an emergency HOA meeting the next week and insisted it be a public forum. He wanted to rally the neighborhood, call me out, and paint his arrest as a targeted campaign. I told my team to be ready and planted a pair of detectives as concerned citizens in the crowd. When the night arrived, the community center looked like a battlefield. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights buzzing. Holt in his suit like a man who dressed for his execution. He started with theatrical indignation, parroting the language of victims. People murmured, some nodded. Then I stood up. There's something satisfying about standing in a room full of people as a one who knows more than anyone else. I walked to the podium, not to accuse but to present evidence. I projected the doorbell footage, the Metro Enforcement LLC filing with Holt's name, the vendor receipts, the recorded cafe conversation. Each clip landed like a hammer. Holt's smug mask trembled and fell. Why would you do this? A woman asked from the back, voice trembling. Why go so far? That question hung in the air. It had been the same question I'd asked myself at 3 a.m. What compels a man to weaponize authority? But Holt answered it himself. Arrogance, fear of losing control, a hunger for the small kingdom people like him build where they can lord over others with impunity. The tide turned. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down stood up, telling stories of fines, of late-night men in uniforms watching their houses, of intimidation disguised as enforcement. Each testimony added weight. Holt spoke louder, pleaded for calm, promised reforms. It was too late. People saw the pattern. They saw the evidence. They saw a board that had abused trust and a man who tried to manufacture fear. Within days, Holt resigned from the HOA. The county revoked Metro Enforcement's private security license after the AG's office uncovered forged documents and fraudulent applications. Dempsey cut a plea deal and agreed to testify against Holt. The temp agency that had supplied the van and uniforms was investigated for negligent hiring and bookkeeping errors that suggested money laundering. Other small vendors who'd taken payments were subpoenaed, and bank records peeled back layers of transactions that looked suspicious enough to keep auditors busy for months. There were legal fights, always legal fights when power falls. Holt's lawyer filed an ethics complaint against me, alleging I'd used my position to influence the investigation. It made for a few uncomfortable weeks. Headlines, internal reviews, a temporary suspension while the ethics board reviewed my actions. I'd expected it. It was part of the cost. The AG's investigator testified on my behalf and provided the trail of evidence that proved my involvement was procedural and measured. The ethics board cleared me. The public, which had watched Holt evaporate in a storm of his own making, rallied in support. In the end, the state charged Holt not just with fraud and forgery, but with conspiracy to commit impersonation and extortion. Revenge tasted like victory, but victory tasted complicated. I didn't dance on the courthouse steps. I visited Dempsey in holding, watched him deflate, and saw the fear he'd once weaponized mirrored back in his eyes. It was not satisfying. It was precise. Justice does not need a dance. The neighborhood changed. The HOA was restructured with new bylaws that restricted enforcement powers and required independent audits for any third-party vendors. They voted to dissolve Metro Enforcement Corporation and contract with a certified, transparent security provider who worked with the police and the AG's office on community outreach. My fence? It stayed. A neighbor painted a wooden sign and nailed it to the gate, protected, but not policed. A few months later, at the community summer picnic, an older woman I'd never met before found me, took my hand, and said simply, "You made us feel safe again." There was genuine gratitude in her voice. It warmed me in a way the courtroom never would. Still, the cost had been real. I'd been dragged into public scrutiny. My department had been tested. My patience had been worn thin. The bruises I'd gained were not only physical, they were reputational and moral. I had to ask myself that same question that had floated through my head in the quiet hours. How far would I go to make them pay? The answer was a quiet one, far enough to stop them. There are days I replay parts of the case the way some men replay wars. Would I have done anything differently if it had meant my badge? If my family had been targeted? Maybe. But regrets felt indulgent. The men who had tried to bully a neighborhood and impersonate officers had been stopped because I recognized the pattern and decided to act. In the end, Holt went to prison for 2 years. Dempsey's sentence was shorter, time served and probation, plus community service, because he cooperated. The temporary agency's owner faced fines and a lengthy audit. The HOA, chastened, rebuilt itself slowly and under watchful eyes. At night, when the house is quiet and the porch light throws a pale pool on the driveway, I sometimes think about that first knock. It was meant to intimidate, to invert power. But it taught me something that no training can. Power is only as strong as the people willing to enforce it. When the wrong people wear the badge, the community suffers. When the right people stand up, things change. I keep my doorbell camera on now, not out of paranoia, but as a record, because proof matters. Because when men like Holt try to rewrite rules with forged signatures and fake badges, they need someone who understands both the law and the theater of authority to take the stage and cut the strings. I'm the chief of police. I knock back. And this time, the knock I gave him didn't come from the outside. It came from the inside out.